I was finishing up dinner when I first felt that familiar knot in my stomach. It had been a week of late nights for Lisa, my wife of 10 years. She kept saying it was work, that she was wrapping up a big project for one of her clients. But I knew her well enough to see through the cracks. This wasn't just work. Something was off. I scraped the last of the dinner into the trash, trying not to let my mind wander too much. But I couldn't shake the feeling. I'd seen this before, when she started working late for weeks at a time. Back then, it was a different job, different circumstances, but the pattern was unmistakable. I didn't want to admit it, but a small part of me was starting to worry. As I was wiping the counter, I heard the familiar buzz of her phone from the other room. It was a ringtone I didn't recognize, so I walked over. The screen lit up, and my heart did this weird little flip. There, at the top of the messages, was a name I didn't recognize: Eric. My curiosity spiked, and without thinking, I swiped open the conversation. I felt my stomach drop as I read the messages. They were explicit, detailed, intimate, and filled with plans for secret meetups. It was like being punched in the gut. The shock was overwhelming, but the humiliation hit even harder. I felt like I had been knocked back into some parallel world, where everything I thought I knew about my marriage was shattered. I scanned the messages again. This wasn't something innocent. Lisa was having an affair. The words blurred in front of me as I stared at the screen, but I couldn't look away. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, but my hand shook too much to do that. It felt like the room was closing in on me. How had I missed this? How long had this been going on? Just then, the sound of the front door opening echoed from the hallway. Lisa stepped inside, looking tired but still beautiful, as always. "Hey," she said with a smile, her voice light as if nothing had happened. "How was your day?" I froze. Every ounce of anger, betrayal, and disbelief that had been brewing inside me suddenly came to the surface. My mind raced, but my body didn't move. It was like I was paralyzed. I didn't know how to approach this, how to say the words that needed to be said. So instead, I stood there, holding her phone like it was some kind of evidence I couldn't yet process. She stepped closer, noticing the look on my face. "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with confusion. But I was too far gone, too overwhelmed by the wave of emotions crashing over me. I couldn't stop myself. "Who's Eric?" I asked, my voice rough, barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened, and for a moment I saw something flicker across her face. It wasn't guilt, not exactly, but there was something there, something I couldn't quite place. She took a step back, her mouth opening, but no words came out. She looked at me, then at the phone in my hand, then back at me again. Finally, she crossed her arms and shook her head. "You've got it all wrong." I didn't know what to say to that. My chest tightened. "I've got it all wrong," I repeated, my voice cracking. "You think I'm stupid? I read the messages, Lisa, the plans, the intimacy." The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, but there they were. She stepped forward now, but instead of reaching for me, she put her hands up, like she was trying to put distance between us. "Mark, I don't have to explain myself to you. You've been suffocating me for months." Her words hit me like a slap. "Suffocating?" I repeated. My mind spun, the irony of it all ringing in my ears. "You're cheating on me, Lisa, and you're blaming me?" Her eyes flickered with frustration. "I'm not blaming you. I'm just—" She cut herself off, shaking her head. "I don't want to do this right now." I could feel my face flush with humiliation and rage. "No, I think we need to do this right now. You need to explain to me why you've been lying to my face all these months." Her posture shifted. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't apologetic either. She just looked defeated. "I don't know what you want from me, Mark. I've tried, okay? I tried to make this work, but you just don't get it." She shook her head as if I was the one who had failed, not her. I needed space. I needed something for myself. I felt my blood boil. "So what? An affair is your way of getting space? You think this is some kind of solution?" She sighed deeply, then looked me straight in the eyes, her voice low. "Maybe I just needed to feel alive again. You wouldn't understand." I stood there, staring at her, my chest heaving as I tried to process her words. She was saying this with such conviction, like it was somehow my fault that she'd sought solace in someone else's arms. I took a step back, holding up the phone again. "I don't understand. How about you explain this, Lisa? How about you explain why you thought you could get away with this?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she threw her hands up in the air, a gesture of frustration. I don't know, okay? Maybe it's easier to just blame you than face the fact that I've made mistakes. She looked at me, her voice softening. But you're not perfect either, Mark. You've been distant. You've been so focused on your work, on everything except me. I'm not saying what I did was right, but I'm not the only one who's messed up here. For a moment I stood frozen, the air between us thick with tension. The sting of her words and the weight of her betrayal clouded my mind. And in that moment, I knew everything had changed. I didn't want to hear anymore. I didn't want her excuses, her justifications. You're right, I said, my voice ice cold. You're not the only one who's messed up. And with that, I walked out of the room, leaving the phone, the betrayal, and Lisa behind. She didn't follow, and that in itself said everything. That night, after Lisa left, I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just sit there and pretend everything was fine when my entire world had been flipped upside down. Every inch of my body burned with anger, but beneath it, there was something deeper, something darker. Betrayal. I couldn't think straight. I needed to see the proof, something more concrete, something undeniable. I spent hours sifting through financial statements, receipts, anything that might show where Lisa had been funneling money. My heart pounded with each document I flipped through, each line I scrutinized. And then, right there, buried in the middle of everything, my jaw went slack. Lisa had been transferring money, large sums, to an account I didn't recognize, the same account tied to Eric, her lover. I could feel the blood rushing to my face, my head buzzing as the realization set in. This wasn't just some emotional affair. This was a full-blown betrayal, one that was costing me, not just in trust, but in cash. She'd been using our joint account to fund her affair. Each transfer was like a fresh punch to the gut. The anger that had started as a low simmer exploded. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. She'd taken something that was supposed to be ours, my hard work, our shared dreams, and used it to betray me. I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my coat and headed out. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't let it go. I had to confront her. No more waiting. No more pretending that everything would be okay if I just ignored it. The drive home was a blur. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My hands shook from a mix of rage and anticipation. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. Eric's luxury sedan parked in front of the house. My stomach churned. I got out of the car and stood there for a moment, my fists clenched by my sides. I knew they were inside. I knew what was happening, and something snapped in me. I had to see it for myself. I had to hear it. I snuck through the front door, the lock clicking softly behind me. I barely made a sound as I moved through the hallway, drawn to the living room by their laughter. The sound of it made me want to scream, but I forced myself to stay silent, to remain hidden in the shadows. And then I saw them. Lisa and Eric, sitting together on the couch. She was leaning into him, laughing at something he said, her hand on his chest. Her smile was so familiar, so effortless, like it had never been mine. She had this look on her face, a look I hadn't seen in a long time, and it was all for him. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat echoing like a drum in my ears. They were so wrapped up in each other, they didn't notice me standing there in the doorway. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, and the floor creaked beneath my weight. Lisa's eyes snapped toward me, wide with surprise. Eric froze, his smirk fading. There was an awkward moment of silence before I spoke. "So, this is how it is now?" I asked, my voice low, deadly calm. "This is what you wanted?" Lisa stood up, her face shifting from surprise to defensive. "Mark, this isn't what you think," she began, but I cut her off. "No, this is exactly what I think." I turned my eyes to Eric, my anger boiling over. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Eric stood up too, his posture shifting, suddenly more confrontational. "You have no right to be here," he sneered. "This is between me and Lisa." "No," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You don't get to walk into my life and destroy everything I've worked for." I pointed a finger at Lisa. "And you!" I spat. "You've been lying to me, using me." Lisa opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Eric sneered again, stepping toward me with a cocky grin. "What are you going to do about it, architect?" he mocked. "You think you can intimidate me?" I was done. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let him stand there, mocking me. Before I even realized it, I lunged at him. The scuffle happened so fast that it almost felt like I wasn't even in control of my own body. Eric shoved me back, but in that moment of chaos, I saw the hammer on the workbench in the garage through the open door. Without thinking, I pushed past him, made my way into the garage, and grabbed it. When I turned back, Eric was already coming at me, fists raised, a cocky grin still plastered on his face. He was bigger than me, stronger, but something inside me shifted. The rage I'd been holding back all this time broke through. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. This was about survival. I stepped forward, holding the hammer, but I didn't need to use it. He backed off. "You crazy bastard," he muttered, trying to steady himself, but the look of fear was already starting to creep in. I took another step forward. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice cold, barely recognizing myself. "And don't ever come back." He didn't argue. He didn't even say another word. He just turned and stumbled out of the door, his pride and his bravado shattered. Lisa didn't move. She just stood there, frozen, her eyes wide and filled with a mix of shock and something else I couldn't quite place. I didn't say anything else. I couldn't. My chest was tight, my heart still racing as the adrenaline slowly drained away. All I could do was stand there, watching the man I once considered a stranger limp away. And my wife, the woman I thought I knew, staring at me with a mix of fear and disbelief. And in that moment, I knew something had changed forever. Summary: Mark confronts Lisa and Eric after discovering the affair. The confrontation turns violent when Eric mocks Mark, and in a moment of raw emotion, Mark grabs a hammer from the garage and strikes Eric. The once passive architect is pushed beyond his limits, and the incident sets the stage for a full-scale war between him, Lisa, and Eric. That night, after the confrontation with Lisa and Eric, I couldn't sleep. My mind wouldn't stop racing, replaying every moment of the evening. The image of Lisa and Eric laughing together, so carefree, haunted me. I tried to ignore the noise in my head, but it only grew louder. I couldn't just sit back anymore. I couldn't let them win. The next day, I took the first step to take control of the situation. I stayed home from work and spent hours sifting through every bank statement, every email, every transfer I could find. I needed to understand the full extent of what Lisa had done. If she thought she could get away with this, she had another thing coming. The more I dug, the more I found: receipts for expensive dinners, shopping sprees, and hotel stays. All paid for with our joint funds. All paid for by me. The evidence was there, clear as day. Lisa had been using our money to fund her affair. I felt the anger swell again, like a wave about to crash. But this time, I wasn't going to let it crush me. I made a list of every person who needed to know the truth: her parents, her younger brother, friends who had no idea about the lies she'd been feeding them. I wasn't going to let her turn the narrative on me. I was going to expose everything. I spent the entire day on the phone. First, I called her parents. I could barely contain my voice as I explained how Lisa had been using me, lying to me, and running up bills in my name. I told them about the affair, about the stolen funds. There was no point in holding back now, no more protecting her. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then came the hardest part: her younger brother. The guy who used to look up to me, who always saw me as the steady, dependable figure in their family. I told him everything, every single detail. I didn't want to do it, but I had to. I wasn't going to let her paint me as the villain when I was the one who had been wronged. When I finally hung up the phone, I felt a little lighter, but it wasn't over. I wasn't done yet. The next day, I called a lawyer. I wasn't just going to sit back and let her continue destroying me. I had been passive for too long. The lawyer confirmed that I had a case, everything from financial fraud to emotional distress. I signed the papers, and the divorce proceedings began. But I wasn't going to let her walk away with her dignity intact. I had one more thing to do. That afternoon, I took a deep breath, sat down at my computer, and started working on something I'd never imagined myself doing. I built a dossier. I spent hours compiling everything I had: the bank statements, emails, even screenshots of the texts between Lisa and Eric. Once it was ready, I uploaded everything to a secure server. Then I shared the link. It wasn't just for her parents or her brother. It was for everyone. I sent it to her closest friends, her coworkers, anyone who would be shocked by the truth. I didn't care about the consequences anymore. Lisa was going to face what she had done. And if she wasn't going to take responsibility, I would make sure everyone knew who she really was. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction as I hit send. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe again. The weight I'd been carrying for so long had been lifted, and I wasn't done. I was done being the victim. The night after I sent out the links, I barely slept. I was running on adrenaline, my mind still processing everything that had happened. Lisa and Eric's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was now public, and I wasn't about to let it go unnoticed. I'd made my move, and I was already feeling the first stirrings of victory. The next morning, I sat at my desk, scrolling through the notifications that had flooded in overnight. Emails, texts, comments, all of them responding to the evidence I'd shared. Lisa's friends were reaching out, some in shock, some in anger. But most notably, there were her co-workers, those who had been oblivious to her lies. I watched the flood of messages pour in, a tiny part of me beginning to feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. But it wasn't just her social circle that was responding. I knew Lisa's professional life was about to crumble too. I'd already made sure of it. The first piece of fallout came sooner than I expected. As I was grabbing a coffee, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw the caller ID. It was her boss, a man I knew only from company events. My stomach tightened as I swiped to answer. "Mark, it's David from work," he said, his voice steady but laced with something I couldn't quite place. "I need to speak with you. It's about Lisa." I barely waited for him to finish. "It's about time," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "You've seen the link, right?" He didn't respond right away, but I heard the hesitation. Finally he spoke, his voice softer. "I just had to let you know that Lisa has been put on unpaid leave. It's company policy when something like this comes to light." I swallowed, trying not to show my relief. "I understand," I said calmly, though my chest felt lighter than it had in days. "I just wanted to make sure the truth came out." David's tone shifted, but not towards sympathy. "Mark, we have to do what's best for the company. We've been made aware of the situation, and we're handling it from our end, but I need you to understand that. Well, this isn't going to be easy for either of you." I felt a flicker of guilt, but it was fleeting. "You can handle your end," I said. "I'll handle mine." I hung up and sat there for a moment, the weight of it all finally sinking in. Lisa's work life was falling apart, and this was just the beginning. Later that day, I got the confirmation I needed. Eric had filed a police report. He'd told them I was the aggressor, that I'd attacked him for no reason other than jealousy, but I had something better, something far more concrete. I spent the rest of the afternoon gathering the footage from my security system. The cameras had caught the entire confrontation, my anger, Eric's taunting, the scuffle that escalated into violence. I pulled the footage from the garage and sent it to the police with a simple note attached. "Here's the truth." Within hours, the police came to arrest Eric for trespassing and assault. He'd made the mistake of filing the report before realizing I had all the evidence I needed. They'd found the footage, and it was clear. Eric was the aggressor. That was the first real victory I felt in this whole mess. As I waited for the final details to unfold, I took the time to upload all of the incriminating documents I had gathered from Lisa's life. Everything. The receipts, the messages, and the bank statements. Everything that showed just how far she'd gone. I uploaded the files to a secure link, then shared it with Lisa's co-workers, friends, and anyone in her social circle who might need to know the truth. I didn't want to be cruel, but I was done with hiding her lies. I wanted everyone to know the woman she truly was, the woman who had stolen from me, betrayed me, and left me for dead. It wasn't long before Lisa's professional life started to unravel. Her boss informed her that she was suspended indefinitely, pending an internal investigation. I could only imagine how that felt, her world crumbling piece by piece, as the people around her finally learned what she had done. I received a few more messages that evening, mostly from people who had never imagined Lisa capable of such deception, but none of them felt as satisfying as seeing her boss's call. Lisa was falling, and I was starting to feel the first real taste of triumph. I had started a fire, and it was spreading. The next evening, Lisa returned home in tears. Her makeup was smudged, her eyes puffy from crying. For a moment, I thought about saying something, anything, to soften the blow. But then I remembered the destruction she had caused, the lies, the betrayal. She took one look at me and immediately rushed to my side. Her voice cracked as she spoke, her words desperate. "Mark, please, please just stop. I'll sign everything. The divorce papers, the financial stuff. Just stop, okay?" She collapsed onto the couch, her hands clutching her face, as if trying to hide from what she'd done. I stayed silent for a long time, watching her, feeling that strange foreign calm wash over me. This was her moment to face the consequences of her actions, to understand the depth of what she'd destroyed. She sniffled, looking up at me with tear-filled eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far, Mark," she said, her voice filled with a mix of guilt and frustration. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear I didn't. It was just one mistake, and it turned into 1,000. Her hands trembled as she reached for the divorce papers on the table, pushing them toward me. I could feel the weight of the situation in the air, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy. She wasn't sorry for the affair. She was sorry for getting caught. She was sorry for everything coming to light, but there was no genuine remorse. "No," I said, my voice steady and firm. "You didn't just make a mistake, Lisa. You betrayed me. You lied to me. You used me. You used everything I gave you to destroy what we had." She recoiled slightly at the harshness of my tone, but I couldn't stop. "This isn't about your mistakes. This is about you choosing someone else over me. You didn't think for a second about the consequences. You didn't care." Lisa opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. I had nothing left to say to her, nothing left to explain. The look on her face said it all. She knew she'd lost. She just didn't want to admit it. I could feel her trying to regain control of the situation, trying to manipulate me again. "Mark, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up, but you're not making this any easier. You're making me feel like a monster. You're the one making this impossible." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't give in to the familiar wave of guilt that was starting to creep in. Not this time. "You're the one who ruined everything," I said, my voice cold. "Not me. Don't try to turn this around on me. You think I'm a monster? You're the one who chose this path." She looked at me, her eyes flickering between anger and desperation. I just didn't know what to do anymore," she said quietly, the tears still falling. "I felt suffocated by everything, by you, by all the expectations. I needed something for me, but I didn't want to lose you." The words were like daggers, but I had no sympathy left. "You didn't lose me, Lisa," I said, shaking my head. "You threw me away, and now you want me to fix it. Well, I'm done fixing things for you. This time, it's over." She stood up now, her face flushed with frustration. She stepped toward me, her voice rising with panic. "No! Don't do this to me! I can't lose everything! I can't—" I stepped back, not wanting to be near her, not wanting to hear the excuses anymore. "It's already gone, Lisa. You just haven't realized it yet." She threw her hands up in exasperation, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I really am. But you're ruining everything. You're ruining me." And then, in a final act of defiance, she threw the signed divorce papers at me, her anger mixing with the sadness on her face. "Take them, Mark. I'm done. I can't do this anymore." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, holding the papers in my hand, feeling strangely calm. I hadn't expected this moment to bring me peace, but it did. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of quiet relief. I was free. Free of her manipulation, free of the lies, free from everything she had tried to destroy. But as I stood there, staring at the papers in my hands, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Lisa wasn't done with me. She'd find some way to make things worse, to drag me back into her web. But I wasn't going to let her. I had fought for too long, for too much. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't the one who had lost. I had barely recovered from the storm of betrayal and public humiliation when Lisa struck again. This time, she hit me where it hurt most. She submitted a police report claiming I had attacked her and Eric, twisting the narrative to paint herself as the victim. I stared at the charge in disbelief. She was trying to make it look like I was the aggressor. I couldn't believe it. After everything, after all the lies she'd told, she still had the nerve to make me out to be the villain. My heart raced and my fists clenched, but there was no time to waste. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. When the police arrived, I was already prepared. I had the unedited footage of the incident, the full recording, showing Eric as the one who had provoked me. The moment he mocked me, the pushing, the taunting, all of it. I sent it straight to the police. I wasn't going to let her frame me. Within hours, Eric was arrested for trespassing and assault. The officers were clear. His story didn't match the evidence. The footage I'd provided told the real story, and his attempt to spin it otherwise was falling apart. But it didn't end there. I knew that in order to fully expose her, I needed more. The police weren't the only audience I was worried about. Lisa's lies needed to be laid bare for everyone to see. I spent that night compiling everything I had on Lisa, bank statements, emails, and especially the texts between her and Eric. I wanted her to face the consequences of her actions, and I wanted everyone to see the woman she truly was, the woman who had stolen from me, the woman who had used me, lied to me, and betrayed me in the worst possible way. I didn't stop there. I uploaded the evidence to a secure link, careful to make sure it was shared anonymously. I sent it to her coworkers, her friends, anyone who might have been kept in the dark about her affair. The entire truth was about to spill out. But I wasn't finished. I had to act fast. I called a lawyer first thing in the morning and made sure the divorce papers were finalized. The lawyer was as ruthless as I needed them to be. I wanted Lisa to feel the weight of her actions, to feel the humiliation that she had so carelessly inflicted on me. As I waited for everything to unfold, I felt an unexpected sense of control return to me. The damage had already been done. Lisa's reputation was in the gutter, and the people she had once trusted were starting to turn on her. The final blow came when one of her coworkers, a close friend of hers, reached out to me. She was shaken, disgusted by everything she'd learned about Lisa. "I had no idea," she said, her voice trembling. "None of us did, but now I can't believe we ever trusted her." I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of my own power, the ability to take back control from someone who had tried to strip me of it. Lisa was going to pay for what she had done to me. It had been days since I sent out the incriminating evidence. Lisa's world was unraveling at an alarming pace, but I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't enough to just expose her lies to her friends and coworkers. No, she needed to be held accountable for everything. Her betrayal went beyond infidelity. It was financial fraud. I needed to make sure she paid for every penny she'd stolen from me. That's when the package arrived. I hadn't been expecting it, but when I saw the nondescript box on my doorstep, something in my gut told me this wasn't just another piece of junk mail. It was heavier than I'd anticipated. I tore the tape open and immediately found a stack of documents inside. The first few sheets were familiar: bank statements, receipts, and other financial documents. But then there were others, ones I didn't recognize. Pages and pages of detailed records, many of them dating back to the start of our marriage. As I flicked through them, I felt my breath catch. There was more than I had ever imagined. Lisa hadn't just been taking money from our joint account. She'd been involved in multiple affairs, and it seemed like she'd been using our finances to cover her tracks. Hotel bills, extravagant shopping sprees, luxury services, all purchased with the money that was supposed to be ours. And then, right at the bottom of the pile, a note. "You'll want to see this." The handwriting was neat, but I didn't recognize it. There was no name attached, but I had a feeling I knew who had sent it. It had to be Hannah, Eric's ex-girlfriend. I'd caught wind of her bitter animosity toward Lisa. She had always known what Lisa was capable of. This was revenge, and it was personal. The documents painted an even clearer picture. Lisa wasn't just a cheater, she was a thief. The more I read, the more the realization hit me. Lisa had been taking money from me for years, all while hiding behind the facade of her supposed love and loyalty. She had used her charm to manipulate not only me, but everyone around her. I paused for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. But then, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. There was no time to waste. I needed to act fast. I could already hear the anger in his voice when I briefed him on the new documents. "This is more than enough to file charges, Mark," he said. "We'll go after her for theft, fraud, all of it." I wasn't going to let Lisa escape. She had used me for years, taking advantage of my trust, my love, and my money. It was time to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions. I spent the next several hours putting the pieces together. With my lawyer's help, I prepared to file criminal charges. But before I did, I had one more thing to take care of. I couldn't let her get away with this, not in front of her family. I made a list of people to inform: her parents, her former lovers, anyone who deserved to know the truth. I gathered the documents and prepared them for delivery. I couldn't bear the thought of letting Lisa maintain her facade of respectability any longer. The final blow came when I called her parents. The conversation was cold, and there was no room for sympathy in my voice. "Lisa's been stealing from me," I said bluntly, "and you need to know the truth." I wasn't prepared for the silence that followed. Her mother's voice trembled as she finally spoke. "How could she do this? she whispered. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The truth was undeniable. And as the words left my mouth, I realized there was nothing more satisfying than watching the curtain fall on Lisa's perfect little world. By the time I finished making the calls, I felt the first real sense of liberation. Lisa's lies were crumbling, piece by piece. Her web of deceit was being torn apart, and there was no one left to protect her. I had already sent the files to everyone, her coworkers, her friends, her former lovers, exposing the woman she had worked so hard to keep hidden. I wasn't doing this to hurt her. I was doing it to make sure no one else would fall for her games. No one else would be fooled by her charm. But the truth would speak for itself. Mark sat across from Detective Alvarez, the weight of everything that had happened weighing heavily on him. He'd never imagined it would come to this. After all the lies, the deceit, and the personal devastation, now he was sitting here, working with law enforcement to take down a criminal network. I know this is hard to swallow, Mark, Alvarez said, his voice steady and authoritative. But Lisa's actions are part of something much larger. This isn't just about betrayal or cheating, it's a full-scale operation. Mark's mind raced as he absorbed the detective's words. He'd suspected something bigger was at play, especially after discovering Lisa's spending habits, but hearing it from Alvarez confirmed what he had feared. Lisa had been manipulating not just Mark, but others, targeting wealthy partners for years. It wasn't just her affair with Eric that had turned his world upside down. It was everything else. What are you asking me to do? Mark's voice was calm, but the fatigue was beginning to show in his eyes. He hadn't slept well in days. His mind was still reeling from the avalanche of revelations, but he knew he had to push through. We need you to help us get information. Lisa trusts you. She thinks you'll want closure. You can play that angle, Alvarez explained. We need you to meet with her. Pretend like you're trying to work things out. See if you can get her to slip up. Talk about her involvement with these people. Mark swallowed hard, unsure if he could keep up the charade. The thought of facing Lisa again, especially after everything that had happened, was almost too much. But there was no other choice. He couldn't let her, or anyone, get away with this. I'll do it, Mark said, his voice tight with resolve. But I'm not doing it for her. I'm doing it because I want to make sure she doesn't hurt anyone else the way she's hurt me. Alvarez nodded. That's exactly what we need. We'll monitor your conversation. You just have to stay calm and collected. Let her think she's winning. Make her feel comfortable enough to let something slip. The meeting was set for 2 days later at a local coffee shop, one of the few places Mark and Lisa used to go to when things were still normal. He hated the idea of stepping into that space again, but he knew it was his only chance. When the day arrived, Mark walked into the coffee shop, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. He had to keep his emotions in check. He couldn't let Lisa see how much she had broken him. He had to play the part, even if it made him sick to his stomach. Lisa was already there, sitting by the window, her posture stiff but somehow still elegant. When she saw him, she stood up quickly, her eyes filled with surprise. But there was no guilt, not the way he had expected. There was nothing in her expression that showed any remorse for what had happened between them. It was almost like she was pretending none of it had ever occurred. Mark, she said, her voice soft, but there was something cold in her eyes. I wasn't expecting you. I know, this is hard, Mark said, keeping his voice calm, controlled. He could feel the presence of the detectives nearby, their eyes on him, waiting for him to do or say something that would reveal Lisa's true involvement. He sat down across from her, his gaze unwavering. I thought maybe we could talk about everything. Lisa hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I don't really know what there is to say, she replied, her voice distant. You know what happened. You know what I did. There's no going back. Maybe not, Mark said, leaning forward slightly. But you don't think I deserve an explanation, after everything, after what you put me through? She shifted uncomfortably, but only for a moment. I don't owe you anything anymore, she said, her tone flat. What happened was my mistake. I don't expect you to understand, but it wasn't about you, Mark. It was about me, about what I needed. Needed? Mark repeated, his voice tight. He leaned back, trying to maintain composure. So, you needed to cheat on me, lie to me, and steal from me? That's what you needed? Lisa's expression faltered for a brief second, but she quickly masked it, her eyes narrowing. You don't get it, she said, her voice rising. You think everything's about you, about your money, your work. You're so consumed by your own success that you didn't see what was happening to me. Mark's fists clenched under the table, but he forced himself to relax. You think I didn't see you? You think I wasn't trying? You think I didn't care? He paused, then continued, his voice low. I wasn't the one who went behind your back and spent our savings on a man who wasn't even worth your time. Lisa's jaw tightened. She was about to respond, but Mark cut her off. You were just a pawn in something bigger, weren't you? He said, his voice steady but dripping with coldness. How many others were there? How many people did you use? Lisa froze, her face paling. For the first time, her composure slipped. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Mark knew then. He had her. He let the silence hang for a moment before leaning forward again, his voice barely above a whisper. I know about the people behind all this, Lisa. You've been part of a bigger fraud ring, haven't you? Her eyes widened, panic flickering in her gaze for just a second before she regained her composure. What are you talking about? Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't sure if she realized what she had just done, but there was no going back now. Tell me about them, Mark demanded. The people you've been working with, the ones who've been manipulating you, the ones who've been using you. Lisa's expression hardened, her lips pressing together into a thin line. She glanced at the door as if considering making a break for it, but it was too late. The detectives were already moving in, preparing to close the trap. For a long moment, Lisa didn't say anything. Then, in a low voice, she muttered, You don't understand. I didn't have a choice. They promised me things. Mark sat there, watching her, waiting. The pieces were finally falling into place, and he knew that he had her. Mark sat in the quiet corner of a dimly lit cafe, the hum of conversations around him barely registering as he focused on the task at hand. He had come this far, and now the final pieces of the puzzle were about to fall into place. The plan was simple. Keep meeting with Lisa, play the role of the vulnerable ex-husband seeking closure, and draw out information that would expose the full extent of the criminal network she had been part of. But Mark had to keep his emotions in check, to mask the fury and betrayal still simmering beneath the surface. The stakes were higher than ever. Detective Alvarez was watching from a nearby table, his eyes fixed on Mark, monitoring every word, every movement. Mark couldn't let Lisa know he was being monitored. He couldn't let her sense the trap that had been set. When Lisa arrived, she looked almost too composed, as though the weight of everything hadn't touched her at all. She slid into the seat across from him, her eyes flicking to his face before she quickly looked away, as if trying to avoid meeting his gaze for too long. Mark, she said, her voice a mix of weariness and detachment. I didn't think you'd call. You said everything you needed to say when you dropped the bomb on me. Mark leaned back, trying to look like the broken man he had been pretending to be. He forced a weak smile. I just wanted to make sure you're okay, he said, keeping his tone soft. I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, but I think I deserve some answers. I need to understand why you did what you did. Lisa exhaled sharply, tapping her fingers on the coffee cup in front of her. You still don't get it, do you? It wasn't about you, Mark. It was about me, what I needed for myself. You were so wrapped up in your perfect world that I didn't matter anymore. Her voice wavered for a second, but she quickly regained her composure. Mark nodded, swallowing the anger that rose in his chest. I understand that, he said slowly, his voice low and careful. But you should have talked to me. You should have told me how you were feeling. Instead, you went behind my back. You used me, used our life together to fuel whatever you were trying to escape. Lisa's eyes flickered with something Mark couldn't quite read. Guilt, maybe, or maybe just resignation. I didn't know how to tell you, she said softly, almost apologetically. It wasn't about you, it was about me. I wasn't happy, and I thought Eric could give me what you couldn't. She paused, looking away for a moment, as if the truth was too much to face. Mark leaned in, his voice steady but firm. And what about the money, Lisa? The money you were using to fund this? The funds you took from our savings, our joint account? Her face stiffened, and for a moment, she looked like she might snap. But she quickly masked it, her gaze shifting uncomfortably. You know I never meant to hurt you, Mark. It wasn't about the money. I just didn't know how to stop. Stop what? Mark pressed, his voice a little sharper now. Stop lying? Stop manipulating me? Stop using me to fund your affair? He could feel the tension rising, but he held his ground. Lisa's eyes darted to the side, and Mark could see the panic flickering in her gaze. But she quickly regained her composure. You don't understand, okay? It was never supposed to go this far. I was trying to survive. Mark felt a pang of something he didn't expect. Sympathy? But he pushed it down, burying it beneath the anger and disgust that had built up over the past few weeks. I think you owe me more than this, Lisa, he said quietly. You owe me an explanation? You owe me the truth. Lisa hesitated, her fingers tightening around her cup. She looked up at him, her expression colder now. I didn't have a choice, she muttered, her voice barely audible. They said it was the only way. Mark's stomach twisted. They. It wasn't just her affair with Eric. There were other people involved, people who had been using her for their own purposes. What are you talking about? Mark asked, his voice low but insistent. Who are these people, Lisa? Who are you really working with? For a moment, Lisa said nothing. She just stared at him, her lips pressed together, her mind clearly racing. Mark could see that she was considering her next move, wondering if she should finally confess. But then the coldness returned and she shook her head. I can't tell you anything, Mark, she said firmly. You wouldn't understand. It's not what you think. But Mark could see it in her eyes. She was hiding something bigger, something more dangerous than he had imagined. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and Mark knew now, more than ever, that he had to keep pushing. I think I deserve to know, he said softly but with a new resolve. The truth, Lisa. I'm done with the lies. For a long moment she just stared at him, her face pale and strained. Then, almost as if she was giving up, she muttered, You have no idea what you're getting into. Before Mark could respond, a brief flash of something crossed Lisa's face, a fleeting look of panic, as though she had said more than she meant to. But it was too late. He'd already heard it. Mark knew that he was getting closer. The truth was on the edge of spilling out, and all he had to do was wait. The detectives, monitoring the conversation from the nearby table, were waiting for their moment. Mark didn't need to say another word. He knew that the operation was moving forward. The end of Lisa's empire was near. It had been months since the dust settled. The world I had once known, my marriage, my career, my stability, had been ripped apart, piece by piece. But now, as I sat in the stillness of the morning, the remnants of that chaos no longer consumed me. It had taken time, far more than I ever imagined, but I was finally starting to breathe again. I sat on my porch, a cup of coffee warming my hands, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. The quiet peace was almost surreal. It had been a long road, longer than I thought I could walk, but I had made it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a reminder that life was moving forward, even as I was still piecing together what had been left behind. A few months ago, I would have answered every call with an edge of anxiety, wondering if it was Lisa or someone else from that world I had been desperate to leave behind. But now I picked up the phone with no hesitation, a calm confidence running through me. Mark, hey, it's Tim, the voice on the other end said. How have you been? Tim was an old colleague of mine from the architecture firm I'd worked at for years. After everything, we'd lost touch. But it felt like now, after all this time, there was a chance to reconnect. I'm doing all right, I said. Better than I've been in a while, to be honest. There was a brief silence before he responded, the words hesitant but full of genuine concern. You know, I've been following what happened. It's crazy, but I know you. You're stronger than that. It was one of those moments where the weight of the past seemed to lift, if only for a second, and I let myself feel it. I had been strong, but strength wasn't something I'd understood until the world came crashing down. Thanks, Tim, I said. It's been a wild ride, but I think I'm finally getting my feet back under me. We talked for a while, the conversation moving between catching up on old memories and the changes in the architecture world. And by the end of the call, I realized that even in the wreckage of the past few months, I had rediscovered something important, a sense of self I had forgotten. I ended the call and leaned back in the chair, staring at the stillness around me. The house I had rebuilt, both in structure and spirit, the friends I had reconnected with, the projects that had kept me going, even as my personal life shattered. I wasn't just moving forward anymore. I was building something new. I had learned to channel my anger, my hurt, into something productive. The legal battles with Lisa were still ongoing, and she and Eric were facing charges that would likely lead to years of consequences. Her network had been torn apart, and I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that justice was finally being served. The weight of betrayal had dulled, replaced with clarity, No more lies, no more manipulation. But there was something else in the air, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. I was no longer the person I had been. I wasn't the passive man I used to be, the one who accepted every hurt, every betrayal, without question. I had found my strength in the storm, and now, as the storm cleared, I could finally see the horizon. I spent the next few weeks slowly reconnecting with old friends, rebuilding the relationships I had neglected over the years, the relationships that had been buried beneath Lisa's lies. They welcomed me back without hesitation, offering support in ways I never thought possible. Then there were the projects. I threw myself back into work, not as a way to escape the past, but because it was something I loved. It reminded me of who I was before everything fell apart, the architect, the one who could create, who could build from the ground up. And so, with every blueprint, every sketch, every foundation I laid for new projects, I rebuilt myself too. Slowly but surely, the scars from the past began to fade into the background. They would always be there, but they didn't define me anymore. One morning, as I sipped my coffee, I felt it, a sense of freedom. It was like the first deep breath after holding your breath underwater for too long. The world was wide open again, and I had reclaimed it. The shadows of Lisa's betrayal, the weight of her lies, were behind me now. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and I was free to live my life, to build my future, without the ghosts of my past haunting me.